It's a warm day in Toronto, and Viktoriia's brought her 2-year-old Arthur to the playground. It's a scene that plays out every day in every city in every corner of Canada, and it's easy to forget just how wonderful it is. Children at play in peace. But for Viktoriia, the scene brings up memories of less wonderful times and places.
Yes, I remember all my childhood, all parks, all streets, my school, my playground. Now it's destroyed. That's why memory of my childhood, it's making me cry.
The park Viktoriia used to visit is gone, destroyed, blown apart. The Russians occupied her hometown of Kherson, Ukraine, on March 1st, 2022. And unfortunately, it isn't just the parks here that remind her of home.
When I see the 51st slogan of State of U.S., so it's really because our neighbors, crazy neighbors, every time they want to take some part of Ukraine also.
Viktoriia moved to Canada because it's a place of safety, a place to escape history. But when she hears Trump talk about made-up borders and the 51st state, it reminds her of a history she fled. Ukraine's history. A history to be learned from. A history to be avoided. Welcome to Gloves Off, a podcast about the threat to Canada's sovereignty and what we can do about it. I'm Stephen Marche. Today's question, what can we learn from Ukraine? We're going to talk to people on the ground who were there when the Russians invaded. We're going to hear from those who saw it coming, and we're going to hear from the survivors. Canada has a special relationship with Ukraine. Viktoriia is one of the nearly 300,000 Ukrainian refugees that Canada accepted after the Russian war started, but Canada had a long tradition of Ukrainian immigration well before then. 3.8% of the country is Ukrainian by origin, making it one of the biggest immigrant groups here. Canada has the largest Ukrainian community outside of Eastern Europe. Where I'm from, Edmonton, Alberta, there were Ukrainians everywhere. If you drove a little bit east, there was Vegreville, which had the biggest pasanka in the world. A pasanka is a kind of elaborate Easter egg that is a traditional Ukrainian craft. The one in Vegreville is 31 feet long. And for Ukrainians who arrived in the early 20th century, Western Canada was practically identical to where they came from. A huge, flat piece of land that grew stuff. The Ukrainians basically moved from one of the world's breadbaskets to create another of the world's breadbaskets. Lately, the Ukrainian-Canadian connection has grown perhaps a little too close for comfort. Canada, like Ukraine, is living next to an inherently dangerous country that threatens its sovereignty.
President, you have said that Canada should become the 51st state.
Yeah. No. Well, I still believe that, but you know, it takes two to tango, right?
It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. But
that was Prime Minister Carney and Trump at the White House in May. The rise of authoritarianism is, quite frankly, something I never thought would be a personal experience. I thought authoritarianism was the kind of thing I would read about comfortably in history books from my living room. I thought it was the kind of thing I would hear moving stories about from refugees giving talks at my local library. All of the garbage of the second Trump administration, the crazy gilded planes, the sudden threats, the muzzling of critics, the assault on law firms and universities, the handcuffing of political opponents, including sitting U.S. senators, unidentified secret police and ICE. It's all completely new to me, new to us, new to Canada. Our ignorance has been a luxury. We've lived in the world's nicest neighborhood for 200 years. Suddenly, our next-door neighbor has gone insane and started burning the furniture in his yard for no good reason and ranting about how everyone else is out to get him and talking about how we've been ripping him off and how we owe him.
Why are we supporting a country, 200 billion plus a year? They should be a state.
Alexander Vindman, a retired U.S. lieutenant colonel, has had a unique perspective on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He served during the first Trump administration as Director of European Affairs for the National Security Council, until his testimony before Congress about abuse of power claims against Trump led to his abrupt retirement. Can you tell me When did you first start to think, I'm talking in the 2010s, 2020s, that Russia was had explicit aims of taking over Ukraine?
I think that the early indicators were probably even as far back as the mid 2000s, where Russia was accumulating the resources and graduating from kind of typical coercion, mischief making, to more aggressive hybrid warfare, buying or coercing election outcomes in its neighborhood and in Ukraine. But, by the time we get to 2014, it becomes pretty clear that Russia is willing to use all elements of national power, including military means, to subdue Ukraine, push Ukraine back into its orbit.
I mean, what we're trying to understand here, like, just to put it in the broadest sense, is how authoritarian countries, and using Russia and Ukraine as the example, why they need to threaten and demean democracies and their neighbors, and how those processes work together. Like, how does a slide into authoritarianism lead to foreign aggression?
Countries tell stories about themselves. They have a narrative that they believe internally and want the world to accept and reflect back at them. For Russia, it's that Russia is a unique, singular, great power, largest country in the world. And the myth that they tell is the fact that they emerged out of Kievan Rus, which was the regional hegemon 1,000 years ago, and that they were an inheritor of Rus and exercised that power to expand in cardinal directions, and along the way rightfully regain control over Ukraine as part of that empire.
I mean, do you think America views Canada the same way, as necessary to its power in the world?
I don't see the indicators that would suggest that there's a appetite from American elites to accept the premise that we're going to wage war on Canada to make it the 51st state. It comes out of nowhere, other than Trump's personality and some wishful thinking that he's like an empire builder or something like that. Sometimes you have to separate the smoke and the fire. And there's a fair bit of smoke on what Trump is saying, but I don't know if there's that much in the way of fire.
Do you see any comparisons, at least, because it's been noted in a bunch of ways that the rhetoric that Trump is using is similar to the rhetoric that Putin is using? The borders aren't real. It's all just historical lines drawn on a map. Things done in 1908 or with Lenin, were big mistakes. Do you see a comparison there, at least?
Completely. There is a significant convergence, and that sounds very much like the way that Trump has been behaving since the beginning of his term, talking about Panama and Greenland and in Canada in those kind of similar ways. But undergirding Putin, you have an elite that shares that kind of worldview.
We saw the firing of the Space Force general in Greenland, the Marines on the streets of Los Angeles. We've seen this sort of purging of the libraries at the Naval Academy. I mean, rumors are getting back of a sort of ideological alignment within the elites. Can they be turned?
I don't think he's got the time to do it. I think he's got, 3.5 years. That's in total, but he might have less than that, because I think we come to 2026 in the midterm elections. There could be a resounding rejection of Trumpism based on the economic chaos. The other thing that's important is I think Canada has lots of allies, and having conversations with allies in general, work with fellow democracies. You've got a natural commonwealth to operate through, to hold your ground and hold the principles. I'm a proponent for the centrality of values to interests, and that they allow us to navigate towards the things that are most important over the long term. So what that means for Canada is that you take a principled stand on what defines the Canadian democracy. It's pluralist. It is one in which there is an understanding of the sharing of the benefits of Canadian prosperity, and a recognition of a common good, and that results in maybe a higher tax basis, but more services being provided. I think that you double down and seize those aspects of what makes Canada great. Because frankly, we probably could learn quite a bit from Canada on the way we take care of our population. I think part of the reason that we have the hyperpolarization we have is because too many people are left behind, or apathetic, or left out.
Well, I find it interesting that there seems to be this contradiction at the core of your thinking. I mean, not that it's wrong, it's actually a good thing, but because you're very practical and you're very realistic about threats, but you're also clear that values are the most important thing, right? Like, you can get caught up in these cycles of exchange where everyone loses and you lose, and also you lose your whole reason for existence as a country. Canada's been so values heavy that we've never really had a realistic conversation. But I think what you're saying about values as the source of realism is actually kind of interesting to me. Like, the key thing is to actually, your values are your strength here.
That's right. And the way I frankly look at it very pragmatically, I look at it at the fact that the realist transactional approach doesn't work. It takes you to the end stage, which is Donald Trump, which is exclusively transactional, and that values offer potentially a long view on the things that really matter. And for Canada, sustaining that unique relationship with the United States is going to be in the cards on the back end of a Trump administration. But we have to, accept where we are right now, and that Trump is a hostile actor to democracy and democratic values, and deal with that reality, and then focus in on the long term.
So, 2 lessons right from the top. The first is that our history with America is not even close to Ukraine's history with Russia. Canada has never been a part of the United States. Ukraine is newly independent. Russians have been planning to absorb Ukraine into their sphere of influence from the moment of independence. There is no evidence that America has any extensive plans to occupy Canada. However, there is one reality that is comparable. America, like Russia, is a world power in steep decline, and it seeks renewed glory through violent fantasies. And as countries slide into authoritarianism, one of the engines by which they survive the inevitable suffering their incompetence inflicts on their own people is violence. Violence against their neighbors. The second lesson is that even with that history, even with knowing who they were up against, the Ukrainians didn't see it coming.
We start hear about our problem in the end of 2021, but we really think, oh no, it sounds like a crazy idea, so no way. I want to stand up from my bed, but I can't. My leg is shaking.
On February 24th, 2022, Viktoriia awoke in Kyiv to the sound of explosions.
I understand that I need to waken my son, but I need to relax. So, okay, honey, wake up. We need to wake in, and I don't know what we need to do.
Pregnant, legs shaking, terrified, she had to keep it together for her teenage son, Kirill. They rushed to the district court building where Viktoriia was working as a lawyer and hid in the basement with friends, colleagues, and her elderly cat, Tyson.
We tried to check news and read what happened, and we scared about noise because we was in the basement and we can't check what happened outside.
Then they got bombed.
We hear a crazy noise, and all of our stairs fall down, all windows broken. And my son said, "Get onto the ground." And we fall down to the ground and wait.
No longer safe, Viktoriia and family fled Kyiv for Hungary, a mad dash to relative safety. Ukraine had conscripted all men 18 to 65, so Viktoriia's husband Vitaly couldn't leave. He drove them to the border, a 10-hour drive.
Yeah, we crying a long time, but okay, see you soon, and make a huge warm hugs as possible. But yeah, we make this decision for our kids.
The shock was total. Their lives were upended. Even though the geopolitical situation may look obvious, when it comes to each person's life, imminent disaster is almost impossible to accept and therefore to recognize. So, what does an invasion look like on the ground? How do you know when you should start worrying for real? Tim Mak is a Canadian-American journalist and the editor of the Kyiv-based publication, The Counteroffensive. It provides in-depth reporting on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and Mak has been in Ukraine since the outbreak of the war. Okay, let's start with a very basic question.
Sure.
Like, how would you describe the situation in Ukraine and Russia right now, at the moment, 3 years into the war?
It's certainly less fluid than it was in this first shocking phase with the siege of Kyiv and the battles around major urban areas. But there's still quite a lot of dynamism.
Right. Canada sort of woken up to this, basically this massive aggression on our southern border, and we're all pretty shocked by it. When did Ukraine start to see Russian aggression coming? I mean, obviously there's a much longer history of it, but like, what are the warning signs that we should be aware of how this rhetoric kind of heats up?
Gosh, you can talk to Ukrainians and they will talk about centuries-long persecution of their culture, their language, the very idea of the existence of a Ukrainian nation. But at the same time, despite this history of this aggression, there have also been large segments of society that have believed that there's a kinship, the shared kind of cultural touchdowns, the business connections across the border. All of those things were arguments that this war would never happen, and yet it happened anyways.
It seems like there's a kind of natural human tendency to optimism.
Absolutely.
That's actually counterproductive in these kind of scenarios. Like, actually, we need to prepare for the worst.
Yes. You've seen this all across Europe in its failure to recognize the rising authoritarianism and the ultimate violence that comes about from a dictatorial regime, and them doing plenty of business ties, dependence on Russian oil and gas for their energy supplies, all of which have been, in the long term, proven to be quite foolish bets.
What does Ukraine done well that we should emulate? What are the steps that we should be focusing on right away?
Well, the obvious one is to enhance Canada's military capabilities, right, in order to enforce its sovereignty and its ability to defend itself. And this is not just in a matter of some sort of grand invasion type scenario, but this is a matter of making sure that there are theoretical, hypothetical costs for bullying a smaller, vulnerable neighbor. One way that Ukraine has done that is through the development of very novel and interesting drone technologies, the development of and the use of military drones, often very, very cheap, attritable, meaning they explode and are one use, and scalable in large number. Honestly, Stephen, I'm like dumbfounded that we're having a conversation like this, where we're brainstorming about,
I'm dumbfounded too, man.
I don't even want to start brainstorming about the military advantages of Canada in terms of invasion. I want to focus on how do we create so many costs to bad behavior that the bad behavior never happens.
I mean, the answer to that seems to be a nuclear weapon, right?
Until you mentioned it, I hadn't thought of it.
If Zelensky could have done that in 2014, would he have done?
Here's the historical background, is that Ukraine used to be one of the world's top possessors of nuclear weapons. And it decided to give them up in the mid-90s in what was called the Budapest Memorandum. And this was a process in which the UK, the United States, and Russia promised to observe and respect the sovereignty of Ukraine and its territory. Obviously, Russia dismissed that. And the United States and the UK, it's very much arguable that they have not done nearly enough to live up to their obligations. But in the process, Ukraine gave up its nuclear armament. I talked to plenty of Ukrainians who terribly regret that political decision. I want to be very careful because I'm wary of coming off as someone who believes that some sort of confrontation, some sort of military confrontation is inevitable or even likely.
Well, what's clear is we have to prepare for it as if it is real to prevent it from happening.
Right.
I mean,
the idea is that you need to, that when someone says that they're going to come over and bulldoze your house, whether you think that they're just trying to bully you or they're trying to get leverage in some negotiation, or on the off chance they might just illegally do that, you need to start making plans for that very unlikely scenario.
What do you think Canadian diplomacy should be doing at this moment?
Well, the whole ballgame for Zelensky has been closer integration with Europe. Right? Can Ukraine be a part of the European Union? To become part of an economic pact or arrangement that is too large to confront as a whole, whether that's politically, whether that's militarily, that the Ukraine wants to be part of a broader group of countries that look out for one another. And for the first time, we're talking about maybe Canada having some sort of very tightly knit role with the European Union. I think the answer for both Ukraine and Canada in terms of deterrence, in terms of its diplomatic future is the same, is in the direction of Europe. If the United States becomes not a reliable partner in the medium term, then like-minded nations that have similar liberal democracy type governments will be the number one tier of potential allies and friends for mutual support.
On the eve of the Russian invasion, the trains from Mariupol on the border with Russia were half empty. Ukrainians have lived in the roughest of rough neighborhoods. Historians call it the Bloodlands. I met a Ukrainian man once who called himself a stationary cosmopolitan because he had lived in 5 different countries while never leaving the same village. The border just moved around him, and the border moved by war. Even with that history, the Ukrainians didn't see it coming. They didn't see it coming because they didn't want to see it coming. And that is the clearest danger to Canada. The natural human impulse to pretend that bad things aren't coming. When you combine inertia with the inevitable slowness of bureaucratic life, it can be a deadly combination. The Canadian economic, political, and military establishments are, to put it nicely, not exactly built for speed. They're built for comfort. And the comfortable thing to do is to keep moving towards the United States. Since the Auto Pact of 1965, which began the process of connecting Canada's economy with the United States, every level of the elite has been moving towards greater integration. For people in senior roles in government and the military and business, the price of overestimating the threat is immediate. The price of underestimating the threat is long-term. But the lesson of Ukraine is that short-term thinking is fatal. When it comes to authoritarians, believe them. When it comes to authoritarians, complacency kills. And yet Ukraine brings me a great deal of hope. As I said at the beginning, I grew up around a lot of Ukrainian Canadians. My mother, who worked as a doctor, accumulated an impressive collection of pasankas, Ukrainian Easter eggs, from her patients as gifts. I can still remember them taking pride of place in our living room cabinet. They were jewel-like in their delicacy and their strength. They took so much effort to make. They took so much control to preserve. They were icons of the fragility of beauty, but also of the strength of love. Those eggs survive because they are cared for, because people who know their value, who want to preserve their culture, work to preserve it. The lesson of Ukraine is simple enough. Start preparing now. So, next episode, we're going to look at how to prepare. How do we defend ourselves? We're going to look at Canada's military situation and what we can do not to be caught off guard by what everybody sees coming. This is Gloves Off. Let us know what you think wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Stephen Marche. Thank you for listening.
The old relationship we had with the United States is over. Canadians are always ready when someone else drops the gloves.
The true north is indeed strong and free.
Oh, Canada, 51st state. 51st state.
Drops the gloves. Free.
People of Canada like it.
Maybe our greatest state.
Drops the gloves.